Passing through the gates of the great city, Clarimonda Philitora stuck her head out the carriage window and looked at all the people, all the buildings that stood along the sunny, cobblestoned boulevard of Saint Michel. Here there were flour-dusted bakers, stevedores, ragged and half-naked boys running to and fro with some mischief in mind, and whores. The whores she especially noted, for she spied 2 or 3 on every major corner. Well, they were no competition, not for her. Paris was huge. Never had she imagined a city so large. Not even Venice, not even Rome, had a fourth portion of this many buildings. Only the Vatican itself could rival the grandeur of these palaces placed row after row. A color guard, bearing pennants of gold and blue, preceded the carriage, and a baggage train followed them. They came to the Seine and a stone bridge that brought them to a large island with a magnificent dual-towered cathedral. Notre Dame, said her lord, grinning at her childlike wonder. Look out the other window. Behold the Sorbonne and the great halls of justice. Clarimonda did so, sticking her golden head out once more, and looking at the priests and scholars, the nuns and bricklayers, and more. On the Seine itself she noticed several boats of diverse kinds, and fishermen along the banks. Soon they came to another bridge, and crossed from the island to the north portion of the city, even more magnificent than the south, if such a thing were possible. "Que bello!" she exclaimed. Most magnificent of all, and coming closer, was the Tuileries Palace. This was the destination of the baggage train of the Marshal of France and Marquis d'Ancre, Concino Concini. The carriage was his and bore his blazon. All that Clarimonda brought were a few dresses and her spinning wheel. Much of the journey he'd spent fornicating with Clarimonda, under the eyes of the driver and footman, but now he seemed to enjoy watching her childlike wonder of seeing the greatest city in the world. After a recent jaunt to his native Florence, the Marquis had received a visit from his old friend and rather distant cousin, Signor Alfonso Concinello Filator of Siena. The family were involved in trade from Siena and Venice through the hinterlands of Carthinia to Vienna. They were far from wealthy despite their efforts, but in the Filator train, Lord Concini spied a treasure he could not live without. Concini admired the 16-year-old daughter of his cousin, especially her dimples. Like many in the north of Italy, she had a strong German strain in her blood, giving her a tall form, golden hair, green eyes, and a faint blush to her complexion. His own features were handsome but sallow, with a Roman nose and curly black hair. As the Marquis had ingratiated himself into the graces of the Queen, so did Clarimonda's ambitious father hope to ingratiate himself into the graces of the Marquis, one of the most powerful men in France. And France was the most powerful nation in Europe. Over wine and bowls of tobacco, Concini and Filator came to terms. "My lord," said Filator, "my daughter is beautiful, and I see she has caught your eye. I wish to sell my wares to the rich noble women of France, but these tariffs make it impossible. If you want her, just amend this tax, and I will grow rich like them." Concini nodded. "Agreed, cousin, but I get a cut of your profits." Clarimonda was deflowered that very night. But this is only what she expected, for the girl had ambitions that equaled her father's. She would now be Concini's latest mistress and return with him to Paris. Despite sharing the Marquis's carriage, Clarimonda arrived in Paris as part of the baggage. This was her lot in life, and she accepted it for now. Along the banks of the Seine, the horses now pulled the carriage, passing the Palace of the Louvre, along a great row of connected lesser palaces, until they turned right. Here her attention was torn between the fabulous Tuileries and the vast gardens that spread out before it. The carriage pulled up to the gates and stopped. A horn blew. Concini alighted the carriage, and taking his sword, was saluted by a dozen officers. He allowed an attendant to add to his flounced sleeves and ribbons an ornate cuirass, a red sash trimmed in gold, and most important of all, the blue baton of the marshals of France, bearing the fleur-de-lis sans nombril of the kingdom. Once properly attired, he would stride into the palace, where he would present himself to the boy king, and more importantly, the queen mother. But none of that did Clarimonda witness. Instead, she was driven to her new residence. The Tuileries and the Louvre formed a massive and pretentious C-shaped complex. Within this C, a variety of lesser buildings and homes had been built, forming something of a miniature town. It was here that Concini intended Clarimonda would dwell until she was summoned to his bed. France, the most powerful nation in Europe. Such a strategic position was not to be lost on any crowned head of Europe, even if that head belonged to the Lord of the Undead. For nearly a century, Vlad Dracula had fought rivals for that title, mostly to the east, but the west could be ignored no longer. Knowing Zhang Shi, lord of the Chinese vampires, to at last be losing his hold on Cathay, Vlad began to look westward in his ambition. He scouted northern Italy, long held by the Holy Roman Empire, and attempted to cede Venice, but the accursed canals, with their sluggishly flowing waters, hindered his movements there. Worse, the Papal States, being held by the Pope himself, prevented him from setting foot thereon. Rather, Vlad's attention fell on Concini. The man may have been a common adventurer, but he was bold, with a quick mind, and had managed to gain his current position by flattering the Medici woman Marie. When she became Queen of France, she brought Concini with her. She even married him to one of her ladies-in-waiting. Kings and queens were normally immune to the depredations of the undead, but if Vlad could enthrall this Concini, he could influence the entire nation, maybe Italy too. But how to get control of him, and how long would it take? "By Christ, that woman is ugly," said Clarimonda to her maid a year later. They both looked out the window of the small parlor as the Lady Dancray rode by. "Scant wonder that Concini takes me to bed more often than that hag." The maid giggled along with her mistress. "Ay, mistress," the maid said, "small wonder they say her to be a witch. Mind thy tongue, Grilda. Thou speak of thy betters. Lady Dancray may be a witch and exorcist, but she is the queen's favorite as well." Grilda curtsied. "Pardon me, mistress." Clarimonda smiled. The maid only spoke what she herself and half of Paris felt. Clarimonda was about to return to her weaving, when at that moment there came a knock at the door. Grilda went to the door, found a page there, took the letter he held, and returned with it to her mistress. Clarimonda broke the seal and looked at the contents. It contained only a crude drawing of an erect penis and a tree. Clarimonda rolled her eyes, knowing exactly what the message meant. "Come, Grilda," said Clarimonda. "Bring me my bonnet and shawl. The Marquis needs his wick polished. Let us hurry, lest Lady Dancray return from her jaunt. She despises me and would love to catch me in the act." "I thought Lady Dancray accepted her husband's, what did you call them, diversions? She has no other option, does she? But I've no desire to encourage a crime of passion. Anyway, she is old and will die some day, and then I will become Lady Dancray. Remember, love is stronger than death." The maid was surprised. "Do ye love the Marquis, milady?" Clarimonda scoffed. "Certainly not. But I have made him love me over this last year. All the wars and bloodshed that men can cause mean less than the love that binds their souls." With her maid as an escort, Clarimonda walked once more to a place in the northeastmost corner of the gardens of the Tuileries. A number of times over the last year, Concini had met her there, as it was his favorite place for a tryst. Conceivably public, being found and watched as he had his way with Clarimonda excited him to no end. Clarimonda spotted Concini peeking out from behind a tree in the livery of a cleric. She instructed the maid to stay by the gate and wait. The girl nodded, having followed these instructions before. Clarimonda entered and walked over to her patron. She bowed to him, then rose and lifted her skirts to her waist. Outside the grove, the maid maintained her place, but she also listened and tried to peek through the foliage. If she could see just a little more, oh, the gossip she would share with the other maids. After realizing she would not see anything today, she turned around to discover a man standing before her. She gasped, thinking him to be the devil, as he'd appeared so silently. In his black cloak and broad-brimmed hat, and with that pale, evil face, she had no doubt he truly was the devil. "Holy Mary!" she began, but she need speak no more. Already the man was running away from her prayer. Oh, this would be a much better story to tell the other girls. Vlad Dracula left the maid, visions of impalement and dismemberment filling his mind in a red rage. How dare a common servant pray in his face? He might have acted on those impulses, but the maid could only have confirmed what he already knew. Concini, the most powerful man in France, save the king alone, was tupping his wife in a common garden. Vlad smirked. All he needed to control Concini was this wife. Clarimonda saw how things were in the world. Using one's position was the means to gain status and wealth. Her position was on her back. Well, there were worse ways to get what one wanted. This way, at least, came with rewards all its own. Rather than return at once to her rooms, Clarimonda chose to walk through the gardens that she had come to love. There she stopped to study a cobweb, so beautiful, so intricate, with each tiny, glistening strand uniting with 100 others to form a lattice from which no insect could escape. The thought made her smile. She was saddened to see a gardener brush it away. But just then, some distance away, Clarimonda spotted a tall man in a black cloak, watching her from under a broad-brimmed hat. His eyes seemed to bore into hers. Grilda also saw the evil-looking man once more and quickly pulled on her mistress's sleeve. Clarimonda pushed the girl away, annoyed. Those strange eyes of his, she found them so compelling. The man stood closer now, though she would swear he had not moved. "Send away thy wench," he said. Clarimonda did so. Grilda, taken aback, crossed herself, but hurriedly lifted her skirts and ran off. The stranger winced slightly, but quickly regained eye contact with Clarimonda. "Let us walk together," he said. She nodded and took his arm and walked away from the gaping gardener. Once alone, the stranger put to her a proposal. "I am Vlad Dracula, a prince from another realm. While Concini seeks to hold France and Tuscany in his hands, I play for greater stakes than these. But Concini can help me gain what I desire." Clarimonda's green eyes fluttered in confusion. "My lord, I fear I understand not. What dost thou ask of me?" "I ask nothing. I offer everything. I offer thee life and youth everlasting. Wouldst thou have this?" "Thou art an alchemist, good sir? Dost thou possess the elixir vitae?" He smirked. "I am not an alchemist precisely, dear child. Rather, I have discovered the formula, and this I can passeth on to thee, if thou so agree." "I do, my lord," she said, "for who would say no?" "Very good, milady," he said. "I will meet thee here tonight, and present thee with this boon." Then he bowed and departed. Imagine all of life and death as a great cobweb spread across the cosmos. Now see thyself upon this web. Thou could be a fly, trapped, awaiting its doom, or thou could be the spider, walking freely, taking what it needs. Which dost thou choose? Over the next week, Clarimonda weakened and grew wan, and at last she died. There was a small funeral of which it would be deemed unsuitable for a man of Concini's position to attend. He did pay for an orison to be chanted by the local priest. 3 days after Clarimonda's burial, Vlad went to the graveyard and waited for the sun to set. Yet he found himself puzzled by the lack of arrangements and the meanness of the burying ground. He spotted the gravedigger and went to him. "Pray thee, good man," he said, "why is this burial for Lady Dancray so common? Was she not of noble birth?" The man gave him a scoff and spat on the ground. "Are ye daft?" said the surly, half-drunk laborer. "'Tain't the Lord's wife we buried, 'tis his whore." The man walked away, shaking his head at the imbecility of nobles. Vlad, being so enraged at the news, forgot to throttle the man's throat for his insolence. He had been deceived. Now, instead of wanting Clarimonda to seduce Concino Concini, he wanted her destroyed. There was no time to dig her up and lop off her head, however. Vlad merely waited a few minutes for the sun to set. The earth stirred. A thin, soiled hand appeared, then its mate. The dirt heaved and was pushed apart from beneath. A head appeared covered in a dirty shroud. Vlad drew his dagger. He slashed open the shroud, revealing the beautiful and surprised features of Clarimonda Philitora, but now undead, ravening with hunger. She saw him, began to smile, then gasped as she saw what he intended, that she would never have the chance to feed. "My lord?" "Deceiver," he railed. "Thou hast the common blood of peasants. Thou art unfit to carry the blood of Dracula." "Untrue," she cried between her fangs, grasping at his arm just before the blade was to strike her dead. "The blood of the Mordantes flows in my veins. My family may have fallen in station, but my lineage is more noble than Concini himself." Vlad, for a change, hesitated. "Forsooth? Well, then I relinquish my blade and allow thee to live, if thou obey my will. Thou shalt make Concini thy thrall, and command him as I choose, for thou alone may enter the Tuileries where he lays his head." "I agree, my lord," she said, relieved. "I will obey thee." "Good. But thou art hungry and weak. I must teach thee to feed for thyself ere thou can return to Concini." He looked around. Now where did that gravedigger get to? As we have said, Concino Concini was the most powerful man in France, save only the king. Or maybe his power was the greater, for his allies included the keeper of the seals, the minister of finance, and the cunning foreign minister Bishop Richelieu. Moreover, 7,000 men would rise to his call if so ordered. All his power in the hands of one reckless and ambitious man did not escape the attention of other nobles. They warned the teenage king that Concini wished the throne for himself. Unsure of Concini, even unsure of his own mother's loyalties, the king agreed to have the marshal arrested. "And if he resists," said the king to his men, "do not hesitate to employ arms." The meaning of the king's words were taken to heart. Concini was assassinated in the streets of Paris that very day. Concini's love for Clarimonda came to nothing, for she never had a chance to feed her blood to him. Love might be stronger than death, but death moves faster than love. Fearing Vlad would blame her, Clarimonda fled Paris and went into hiding.